Test.
Some sort of strength setting in WebEx.
Just one moment, everyone. We're almost ready with the audio fix.
My apologies.
Members, we're back up with audio.
Okay, thank you, Chris-Anne. I've called the meeting to order, declared a quorum, and you were about to read the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Chair. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit.
Thank you, Chris-Anne. Declaration of interest. Do any of the commissioners wish to declare a conflict of interest in accordance with the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Fenton? No. Julie?
No.
Okay, we're good. Okay, before I begin, I'll remind commissioners that the meeting is live on the TTC YouTube channel. Having said that, we're a fairly compact group and a compact agenda, so I think I can follow up with each of the other members with respect to questions or speaking or voting. So I think we can handle that fairly informally. With respect to the agenda, we have 4 items on the agenda. I will hold all 4 items in my name just to make sure we give them the appropriate time. And with that, I think we're ready to go to the first item on the agenda, which is the audit plan from KPMG. Josie, would you like to introduce this, or shall I go straight to KPMG?
Just one moment. Thank you, Chair. It's that time of year again, and so the committee has before it our partners from KPMG, Kevin Travers in particular, who has a presentation to outline our plan for 2022. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Josie. Kevin, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you and good morning, everyone. I am joined today by my colleague, Regan Travers. We're going to speak to our audit plan for Toronto Transit Commission for the fiscal year ended December 31st, 2022. This is the first of 2 formal communications that we'll have with this group. The second one, of course, will be our findings report, which we will present to you at the conclusion of the audit field work and when the draft financial statements are coming for you to review and to approve. So there is material that you've got with you, our audit plan. Regan and I are going to go through what we consider to be the highlights of this document rather than doing a page by page by page. Certainly, we're happy to pause and to respond to any questions you have as we're presenting, or alternatively, we're just as happy and comfortable responding to questions at the conclusion of the formal part of the presentation. If I move in our document to really just even to our page 6, our page 5, it's entitled Our Audit Platform KPMG Clara. So I just want to speak a couple of minutes on how we use technology in completing our audit. So Clara is a global KPMG tool for which we use to house all of our work papers, and it contains our full workflow from an external audit standpoint, from start and planning right through to completion and reporting. It also has a component by which we share data with clients, so sort of a client collaboration, a secure client collaboration site, and certainly allows for us to really enact our project management. And since COVID hit, certainly we use this type of tool with each of our audit clients when we're performing our work remotely. So it does provide us that flexibility in this situation going forward where that happens, but it also allows for us to project manage the audit as well as share data with clients. The next slide, just before I pass on to Regan, speaking in terms of the scope of the audit, make reference to significant risks. So you will see, as we discussed in prior years as well, the significant risk related to fraud risks, related to management override of controls and revenue recognition. And it's not that we consider these risks, these fraud risks, to be particularly elevated in the case of TTC. It's that we are required through our professional standards to presume that these risks exist in every financial statement audit, and then to address those risks explicitly and to report out on the mitigation or the acceptably performed procedures to reduce those risks to a low level. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Regan, who'll take you through the next part of the document.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to discuss materiality, which, if you're following along, is on page 8 of the document. Materiality for this year's audit will be 57.2 million for the TTC and 2.6 million for the TTC insurance company. For the TTC, materiality is determined based on 2% of total expenses. For the TTCIC, it's based on 2% of total assets. The benchmarks and percentages are consistent with the 2021 audit. Our plan materiality was based on estimated year-end results, and it will be reassessed once we receive the final actual results. So I'm just going to move down to the updates on the prior year audit plan. There is a new audit standard applicable for this year, CAS 315, which is the standard on risk assessment. There's also new accounting standards that will be implemented in future years. These are both described in detail in the appendices of the report. On page 10, we describe the involvement of others in the audit. So we involve specialists to assist us with the audit. Actuarial specialists assist with the review of complex estimates. They assist with the evaluation of employee future benefits liabilities and the unsettled accident claim liability. We also use IT audit specialists to obtain an understanding of the IT environment and evaluate general and application IT controls. So I'm going to move down to page 12 of the report. So these are the significant risks that Kevin briefly touched on earlier. So there's 2 that we identified with our audit. The first is the risk of fraud due to management override of controls. This is a presumed risk for the Canadian auditing standards. So it's not a risk that's specific to the TTC. It is required to be a presumed risk in all of the audits that we perform. This is a risk because management is in a unique position to determine estimates, exercise judgment, and post journal entries. Therefore, the opportunity is there to commit fraud. So per the auditing standards, we're required to design and perform various procedures that specifically address this risk. The next significant risk is the risk of fraud due to fraudulent revenue recognition. This is also a presumed fraud risk for the Canadian auditing standards. Again, it's not specific to the TTC, but is a presumed risk in all the audits we perform. So the auditing standards require that we perform procedures to specifically address this risk. Accordingly, we incorporate various procedures into our audit plan to address the risk. So the next section of the report is the other areas of focus. This covers the next few pages, pages 14 to 17. We've provided a ton of detail in here, but at a high level, these are the key areas where we spend the majority of our time during the audit. So we've provided examples of some of the procedures that we perform in order to obtain our audit evidence. So I'm going to transition it back to Kevin to carry out to the remainder of the report.
Thanks, Regan. So the remainder of the report, I'll just highlight a couple of items. I mean, certainly the key milestones and deliverables give you an indication of when we are performing or planning on performing the work, right up until reporting back to this group. In the appendices, while we take them largely as being read, I just want to explain or contextualize some of the items included in the appendices. So certainly within the newly effective auditing standards and change in accounting standards, there's a far bit more of detail relative to the new audit standard that we're implementing for the current year audit related to CAS 315. It's one certainly that management has felt and will feel during the planning process more than anything else, but it is implemented in the current period. There's also reference and more detail in Appendix D relative to change in accounting standards. There aren't any changes that are effective for the 22 financial statement audit, but in 23 there will be, most notably the requirement to implement the standard for asset retirement obligations. So you'll find quite a bit of material relative to AROs in this part of the report. I can tell you that management has well underway a project and a team in order to implement this standard. And we have had a number of meetings with management to ensure that they're on the right path for implementing this ARO standard for their fiscal 23 financial reporting. The last item within our appendices, the audit and assurance insights, you'll find again a number of clickable items in the live document that take any members of committees with oversight responsibility over financial reporting to areas that they could find of particular interest. So it's a number of clicks there that can take you to a repository of current items, developments from a governance and a reporting standpoint. So thank you for your time this morning. That's the formal part of the presentation that Regan and I have for you, but we'd be more than happy to respond to any questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Let me go to questions first. Julie, do you have any questions for the external auditors?
I do not. Thanks, Ron.
Benton?
Yeah, Chair, thank you so much for that. And Kevin, Regan, appreciating you guys coming through and walking us through that. Based on Josie's introduction, sounds like this is not your first rodeo with the TTC, which is fantastic. However, this is my first rodeo on audit. So I actually just have one clarifying question, and it's around the significant, sorry, I just have my agenda packet open. I apologize. The significant risks. So you talked about the presumed risk of fraud related to management override controls and fraudulent revenue recognition. And this is just as my FYI, right? I just super curious. Is this the first time we're talking about these as significant risks, or have they always been significant risks in past audits?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a great question and picked up on that item. We do talk about every year. I mentioned just before we introduced it that these are, any time you perform a financial statement audit, professional standards require us to presume that these risks are present. So they're not particularly elevated for TTC, nor are they new in the current period.
That's great. Thank you, Kevin. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Fenton. I had a question, I think that probably goes to Josie around the implementation of the new accounting standard around asset retirement obligations. Josie, do we have any insight yet as to how material this change might be for TTC?
So thanks for the question. I'm going to actually pass it over to Alex, who's been leading the team on this particular issue. Clearly, there are changes for us. Alex, can you answer the chair's question, please?
Yes, thanks, Josephine, and through the chair. Yeah, we are in the process of completing our scoping phase, and we're soon going to be moving on to the estimation phase of our work. So we haven't yet valued the impacts, but we've been identifying assets that do have an asset retirement obligation as part of our phase implementation plan. And I will add that we have been meeting, providing update meetings with both city accounting, as well as also meeting with KPMG and our internal audit at regular intervals. And obviously, work on this will pick up over the course of the year.
And I'm sorry, I didn't go through all the detail of this standard, but in high level terms, let's say we found that we had a cost of, $50 million 20 years from now to retire some fixed asset. Would we account for that by accruing for that $50 million over the next 20 years, or would it be added to our future capital expenditures, or how would the accounting actually work?
Yes, so we have to recognize the present value of that liability immediately on adoption, and we all obviously for assets that we acquire moving forward, if there's an asset retirement obligation attached to them, that would be recognized at the time of the asset acquisition. And so this will probably be an area where there might be a bit of a disconnect between funding and accounting. So from an accounting standpoint, that obligation is there on the books right away, but from a funding standpoint, we're still working out the details with our city colleague. But my current expectation is that obviously funding will flow when the dollars are actually required. But basically the standard is effectively getting us to recognize that these obligations are there, that they're real, and we need to effectively be aware of and account for them.
Right. Okay. That's how I thought it would work, but it might have an implication for us when we do our 10 and 15 year, capital forecast, capital plan. We probably don't take into account funding for asset retirement at this point, and that's something I would think that we'd need to consider at least going forward.
It'll certainly be a lot more visible. Yes.
Okay. Well, we look forward to seeing the results of your work on that, Alex. Given that it's going to be implemented for next year, I assume we need to have this figured out by the end of this year. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the work plan. Yes.
Okay. All right. I had no other questions, and if there are no one that wish to speak on this, Fenton, I'll ask you.
I have a follow-up.
Sorry, who wanted to speak?
I have a follow-up from what you were asking, because this thing has been looming large, I know, for a couple of years with us. And I'm just interested in how that would impact us on, let's say, procurement. So when we look at what a streetcar costs right now, we don't have to, or let's say last year, we didn't take into account these matters. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes. Well, I think, maybe if I kind of take a step back, not all assets would have a legal asset retirement obligation attached to them, right? So, so what we're talking would be focused on in terms of the implementation is where there is a legal obligation to incur costs as you retire that asset. So, like a good example is like asbestos or underground storage tanks and things of that nature.
So it wouldn't apply, for example, to decommissioning vehicles of some kind?
One area that we're looking into is perhaps e-buses, right, with the batteries and things of that nature. But the LRVs themselves, like I don't think there's we have our normal processes where we scrap vehicles or sell them if there's any party that's interested in them, and I wouldn't expect any kind of legal obligation stemming from that.
So then this standard actually has a kind of a narrow set of parameters as to which assets trigger it and which don't. I'm assuming then, is that correct?
Yeah, it's not so much that it's which assets trigger it. It comes back to that legal obligation, that if there's laws in the book that causes to have that legal obligation attached incurring costs upon asset retirement, right? So that is why that scoping exercise is so important and takes so much time, because you have to go through and identify which assets are in scope. And also part of that scoping exercise is, obviously there's some materiality considerations into it and risk-based approaches to it as well, right? But that's the key thing is that legal obligation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
So
yeah.
Alex, that also means that you have to keep monitoring the law as well, because as the laws change, your obligations will change.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I don't know if Kevin, if there was anything you wanted to add that.
No, thanks, Alex. That was well answered.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Someone had their hand raised, but it's gone back down again. So I assume we're okay there.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. If there's no more questions or comments, Fenton, could I ask you to move receipt of this report?
Absolutely, Chair Lalonde.
Okay. All in favor, Julie?
Yeah, in favor.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kevin. Appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you again in a few months.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Okay. Item number 2 is the ARC compliance flexible work plan status update. I'm going to turn this to Viraj to comment on that. And Viraj, perhaps you can start. Well, I'd start by welcoming you to the Audit and Risk Management Committee and welcoming you to TTC. This is your first meeting with us. Perhaps you'd start by just giving us a little hello and tell us a little bit about your background.
Certainly. Thank you, Commissioner Malone. In terms of my background, I started my career in kind of the banking field and covered a number of areas within kind of banking. So started out in business banking, touched upon a bit of HR, a little bit of the business side of IT, and then started getting into project finance type roles. That's when I got my kind of itch to kind of get into the accounting side of things and become a CPA. And then I kind of transferred over to the consulting side at one of the big 4 firms within their risk advisory practice, really focusing on what I'm pretty much responsible for here at the TTC, which is internal audit, internal controls, Sarbanes-Oxley, that type of publicly listed company activities, enterprise risk management, contract cost recoveries, and performance improvement, to name a few. So I spent a bit of time, about 15 years or so, I think, in aggregate there before I looked at potentially doing a transition to industry. But we'd spent a bit of time at the firm. So I had a secondment opportunity at a large retailer as the head of enterprise audit and risk, which did that as part of the secondment. Had a great time, learned a lot, and then I kind of noodled back into the consulting world again. Then I got another opportunity with one of the largest cannabis producers a few years ago, which was quite interesting. Again, to start up the internal audit and enterprise risk groups from scratch. Always an interesting exercise, being such an interesting industry and new industry. So I had a great time, did that for a few years, and then kind of morphed into this opportunity over here at the TTC.
Great. Well, welcome, Viraj. We look forward to working with you. I'll turn the agenda item to you on the work plan status update. Would you like to give any comments on that?
Very brief, Commissioner Lalonde. We've got 3 deliverables. One is the ARC update, the 2023 audit plan, and the executive compliance certificate update as well. As it pertains to the internal audit or ARC plan, all projects, with the exception of one, have been completed. The one that's still outstanding is in the reporting phase, and we anticipate to complete that within the next 2 weeks. All reports completed to date have associated observations, action plans, responsible parties, and dates assigned. There were 7 projects that we've completed since the last update to the RMC, and it covers areas pertaining to assurance, advisory, and special requests. These reviews have had more of an operational, fraud, and safety lens applied to it. And thematically, the observations tended to relate within documentation, automation, opportunities for automation, and certain failures in control points. We've also been doing some audit follow-up work, which we do periodically and on a targeted basis. And we've done some retesting pertaining to that, and those activities have worked out well. We are also coordinating with the Auditor General, who's looking to follow up on some of their management action plans, which we are helping coordinate as part of that process. which is taking place currently. And then finally, I would say in terms of ERM, that is a bit of a heavy lift that we're anticipating for this year. The focus has been on working with procurement up to now in terms of being able to get a consultant to help us with some of the risk assessment pieces. But in the meantime, in the background, we are working on building a framework and coming up with the methodology and developing a roadmap and working on hiring for some open roles that have hit that area as well. I'll open it to questions at this point.
Thank you, Viraj. Any questions for the report on the status update?
I
Julie?
have one.
Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was interested in the first page of the attachment. Let me just find it now. You talk about enterprise risk and resiliency management. And I'm wondering, just from the way I'm reading this, it sounds like there's going to be a slightly more, I'm going to use the word like holistic or comprehensive approach to risk management, and I would also maybe add in there risk assessment. Is that the case here?
Correct, Julie. So we've got to we need to build a bit more in that area for sure. And it will entail, as you mentioned, a risk assessment process. But also we'll have to develop the framework that'll actually capture, what activities that we're going to be performing as part of this exercise. And then the second piece of that is how does those risks get managed? So one thing to keep in mind is that enterprise risk is an organizational wide, and we're all kind of responsible, but we've got specific responsibilities in certain areas.
All right. Well, I have to say, just if I can make a comment to your answer, is that this is very welcome news, in my opinion. I think this is long overdue, and I am delighted that this was the first item on this appendix of on your to-do list, which is already significant. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie. I'm excited to get this kind of built up as well.
Yeah. It's fair to say I've had a couple of meetings with Viraj, just kind of welcoming and getting some discussions going around the plan for next year. As Viraj indicated, the enterprise risk side of his mandate is a fairly heavy lift. Just to put all this in context, I'd say it's kind of a starting. We're at the starting point, Julie. We have to really rebuild that whole area of capability within TTC. I think we've done some of the legwork in terms of understanding what needs to be done, but there's a lot of work to be done in terms of staffing and implementing on that front. So, more to come on this area, but I think it's very much early days. Not to put words in your mouth, Viraj.
Sounds good, Commissioner.
Yeah. Sorry, Fenton, did you have any questions on this side? Or sorry, Julie, do you have something to follow up?
That was it for me. Thank you.
Okay. Fenton, any questions or comments for Viraj on the status update?
Yeah, just one question, Chair Lalonde. Viraj, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and welcome to the team. I just had one comment on cybersecurity. I think as we progress through the year, we're going to see this become an ever more increased topic, and one that's going to be incredibly trendy. I mean, we're experiencing our own national security crises with these balloons being shot down on a daily basis, it seems. I know that your team isn't working actively on cybersecurity reviews at the moment, but is there a work stream that sits within your purview that engages with research and development and trying to understand where these trends are going, which will then help think through the implementation of new processes, technologies, or ideas to enhance that further? Just a question.
That is part of the plan, Commissioner Jagdev. So there's a couple of things that we need to do kind of before we necessarily jump on that front. So the one thing to be aware is the Auditor General will be performing a penetration test as it pertains to cybersecurity in this space anticipated for this year. So we typically don't overlap too much as those audits do go on. But to answer your broader question, one of the things that we also need to do before we kind of get in that is actually build up the internal audit skill set to cover, I would say, the IT and security areas. So on that front, we're doing that through two mechanisms. One is through the hiring of a candidate with the IT kind of audit skill set that'll kind of enable us to do some of that. But also, what we are working on in the background is to get into a core sourcing arrangement that'll provide us the skill sets to be able to do that. So the short answer is yes, but we've got to build up the skill sets to get into that type of programming framework.
Thanks, Faraj.
Benton, I would say that this is a really important area of inquiry for the audit committee. It has come up in a number of past meetings as well. Just to take a little bit of a detour, since we have a little bit of time this morning, I see we've got Dakshin on the call, and maybe I might ask you, Dakshin, just to give us a brief update as to the work that your group is doing on cybersecurity.
Sorry, before Dakshin does, depending on where this goes, we may have to go in camera, Chair.
Okay, well, if you could maybe keep it to high level things first, Dakshin. If we determine we want to dig deeper, we could decide whether we need to go in camera.
Okay. Through the chair, at a high level, we just awarded a contract to a third-party vendor to conduct a risk assessment, and the results to come to the audit committee for the June meeting. And that's a risk assessment of both the IT and the OT network, looking at risks and just identifying those risks and providing the risk posture to this committee. In terms of any other updates, I would recommend that we would go into camera.
Okay, so it sounds like we're going to get a full briefing on this at the June meeting. So that might be the best time to go into that detail. But I guess the answer to your question, Fenton, is that this has got the priority of management.
Yeah. It sounds like it's top of mind and something that we're all thinking about and engaging with. So that makes me feel comfortable. And I suppose in June then we'll learn more about some of the more specific activities that are being embarked on.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Okay, that said, if there's no further comments or questions, Julie, can I ask you to move receipt of this report?
So moved.
Okay, and all in favor? That is approved. Okay, item 3 is the plan for the coming year. Can I ask you to introduce that as well, Viraj?
Certainly, Chair Lalonde. So 6 projects have been proposed here for our assurance reviews. And just to clarify, that doesn't include elements of advisory or special requests. Those are separate and distinct, and the reason they're not included is they kind of come in as an ad hoc requirement based on management need. We've already received some that we're working on currently as it pertains to advisory and special requests. Also not included within there is the facilitation of any activity performed by the ECC and as we talked about earlier, the build of the ERM program, facilitating that build. A number of factors have gone into coming up with this plan, and it has entailed discussions with executive management, the ARMC Chair Lalonde, and the external audit partners as well. We've also used our historical knowledge based on that we've gained at ARC in order to come up with this, as well as external literature and kind of emerging areas. We've taken a kind of a truncated approach this year to get this plan, which I think is still robust, but there are certain improvement opportunities that I would like to incorporate into the future 2024 plan, which will entail kind of a broader input from the ARMC, i.e. all members, get the input of the Auditor General side of things as well as if the ERM program is kind of in place, then really use that as an input, as well as the ECC, as well as certain process models that we can kind of build internally, which take a little bit of time to do. but that'll kind of help enhance this process, again, as part of continuous improvement. But overall, it is 6 projects. Again, we have flexibility to add, modify, and any kind of changes, so to speak, will be communicated to the ARMC. And on top of the audit plan, we were also submitting an ARC charter that really identifies the role of internal audit and its interaction both within the organization as well as with the ARMC for approval as well.
Okay, thank you, Viraj. Questions? Fenton?
Sorry, Chair Lalonde, I don't have any questions.
Okay. Julie, any questions?
I have no questions as well.
Okay, thank you. Viraj, I'm supportive of the of the plan. We've discussed this ahead of time. I think there are a number of very topical items on there that will be important to get some work done on, particularly transit security, given some of the incidents that the TTC has experienced in the last few months. With respect to the charter, is that new? I should know this, but is that new or is that a revised charter?
It is a new charter that is being proposed, Chair Lalonde. So when following kind of our Institute of Internal Auditor guidelines, they suggest that an internal audit charter be prepared and approved by the board on an annual basis. So we have taken that to kind of execute on that. We have run Rick Leary, our CEO, through that as well, and we've proposed it here. So it is new.
And is there like a standard for charters that come through the auditing profession that this charter would meet?
Correct. Again, Chair Lalonde, there are certain kind of, I would say, topics or guidelines. For example, like independence and objectivity is a requirement, and they also typically will tend to specify what activities would need to go for board approval or ARMC approval, things of that nature. So there are, I would say, templates, so to speak, that can be used, but it's usually customized to the organization as well within the parameters of what is required based on the standards of internal audit.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. It looks fine to me. With that said, Julie, could I ask you to recommend approval of both the plan as well as the charter?
So moved.
Okay. And all in favor? That's approved.
In favor.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, item 4, Viraj, the executive compliance certificates. Perhaps you could give us a little bit of background on these certificates and tell us what the status is for this year.
Certainly, Chair Lalonde. So these certificates are really to get the executive's accountability in terms of complying with laws and regulations. But it's really focused on, now, organizationally, there will be policies, processes within the organization that may naturally kind of uncover some of these elements. This is almost a last kind of end of line mechanism for the executives to have the opportunity to highlight something that may not necessarily have flowed through the normal channels in terms of process. So it ensures that we are capturing all kind of relevant areas pertaining to kind of compliance, laws, and regulations. Specifically, we've got 15 statutes that have been identified that have an overall organizational impact. That is kind of it's a broad brush listing. It won't include all, but these are the most impactful for the organization. And this is the second year that it's being performed. 10 matters were identified in year 1, and the management action plans have been identified for all, which ARC is following up and tracking on as appropriate on a periodic basis. For 22, a number of activities were performed. One was a scoring exercise. As you can imagine, we've got 15 statutes, but it may not apply equally across the various areas of responsibilities. So you needed to prioritize those based on each chief's responsibilities to determine, what are the top three kind of regulations, for example, that have significant importance for that area. So what that allowed us to then do is to coordinate a joint delivery of an ethics training program that was provided to the chiefs. And that was pertaining to Service Bylaw 192, which is really conflicts of interest, things of that nature. As part of the exercise, there was also some targeted staff presentations on ethics that have been started, and I suspect will continue this year as well as HR had provided a circulation to basically communicate to employees in terms of how to deal with gifts from a conflict of interest standpoint. You can see that it's gone into that conflict of interest just based on, and that's really based on the applicability of that regulation across most of the chiefs, so to speak. As for this year, we have got all appropriate sign-offs. We are just working through a couple of the comments that have been received, which we will then put it as part of our normal process, and then determine if those would need to get added as an item that requires a management action plan. So that work is in process right now.
And remind us of timing, Viraj.
So this is typically something. So the sign-offs have already taken place. We're anticipating to do that. So there are some activities where some members have to go back to kind of revalidate and get back to us. But I would say by the next ARMC meeting, we should have a very good sense as to if there were any added items to the action plans that are necessary. Yeah.
Thank you. I noticed that we have Michael Atlas in the meeting as well. Michael, maybe you could say a few words about the process that that legal has gone through in terms of determining which statutes we want to get executive sign off on, and whether there's any continuing work in that area to look at other statutes that might be relevant.
Thank you. So yeah, the answer is yes for adding additional statutes, but the 15 were really chosen based upon kind of going to each group department, asking them what they think applies, and then doing some of our own work about trying to maybe assist them on what requires more emphasis. So Viraj mentioned Chapter 192, which is the Public Service Bylaw. Again, to some people in the organization, people know about that and are key on some of the operation. That's not necessarily something that drives them, but we think is important, so we would add that to the list. But we already know that there's probably 2 to 5 other pieces of legislation that have come up that should be added to the list as we go forward. So, TSSA is one, Planning Act may be another one. So we already know there's at least, 2 to 5 that should probably be added as we go into 2023. And then we'll add that to kind of the education seminars for the executive and the leadership team as well.
Okay, that's great. Questions of Viraj or of Michael? Julie, do you have any?
I do not. Thanks, Ron.
Okay, Fenton?
None at this time.
Okay. I don't have any further questions, so I will ask you, Julie, to move receipt of this report.
So moved.
Okay, all in favor?
In favor.
Okay, that is approved. I don't think we have any other items on the agenda, so Fenton, I will ask you to request a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, all in favor. Julie?
In favor.
Okay, that is approved, and we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, folks.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Have a good day.